Sometimes it takes just 1 second for an entire life to turn upside down. Sometimes it takes just one decision, made from the heart, to open doors you never dreamed of. Joseph was a simple janitor. Every day he cleaned the hallways of a large city school. Nobody noticed him. One afternoon, he saved a young girl from falling from a high floor. He did what any decent person would do. He expected no reward or recognition. The next day, a man in an expensive suit came to the school gate. He was the father of that girl. He said a sentence to Joseph that changed everything. Joseph had no idea that this moment would decide his future. Could he remain himself when standing before a world full of opportunities and temptations? What would you do? The alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, just like it had for the past 20 years. Joseph reached over and turned it off with practiced ease, his calloused hand moving slowly in the dim light of his small bedroom. He sat up on the edge of his narrow bed and rubbed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache in his lower back that came with age and decades of physical work. The room was sparse, containing only the essentials: a bed, a small dresser, a wooden chair, and a faded photograph on the nightstand. The photograph showed a younger Joseph, with his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. That was Anna, his wife, taken 15 years ago before the illness came and took her away from him. He looked at her face every morning, whispering a quiet good morning to her memory before beginning his day. Joseph stood and walked to the tiny bathroom, his knees creaking slightly. He washed his face with cold water, the shock helping him wake fully. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man of 55 years with graying hair, deep lines around his eyes, and the weathered face of someone who had worked hard all his life. But his eyes still held warmth, still held that spark of kindness that Anna had always loved about him. He dressed in his work uniform, a simple navy blue jumpsuit with his name embroidered on the chest pocket, and laced up his worn work boots. These boots had been with him for 7 years now, resoled twice, because Joseph believed in taking care of what he had. He moved to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the small apartment. While it brewed, he made himself 2 slices of toast with butter and jam, the same breakfast he had eaten for years. Simple, affordable, enough to give him energy for the morning ahead. He sat at the small table by the window and looked out at the city as it slowly awakened. The streetlights were still on, but the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. He could see other early risers, delivery truck drivers, bakers heading to work, nurses coming home from night shifts. All of them were part of the quiet army of people who kept the city running while others slept. Joseph thought about his daughter Maria as he ate. She was 22 now, in her final year of university, studying to become a teacher. The thought filled him with such pride it sometimes made his chest ache. Anna would have been so proud, too. Maria was everything good in his life, everything he had worked for since Anna passed. Every extra shift he took, every penny he saved, it all went toward making sure Maria could follow her dreams without the burden of debt crushing her spirit. He had grown up poor, had never finished school himself, but he was determined that his daughter would have every opportunity he never had. His phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message from Maria. "Good morning, Papa. Early class today. Thinking of you. Love you." He smiled and carefully typed back with his thick fingers. "Good morning, my sunshine. Study hard. Love you more than words." She always texted him in the morning, always made sure he knew she was thinking of him. It was these small moments that made everything worthwhile. Joseph finished his breakfast, washed his dishes, and grabbed his old canvas work bag. Inside were his personal cleaning supplies, the ones he preferred over the cheap stuff the school provided. He believed in doing a job well, in taking pride in his work, no matter what that work was. His father had taught him that. A man is measured not by his title, but by the quality of his character and the integrity of his work, his father used to say. Joseph had carried those words with him his entire life. He left his apartment building and walked to the bus stop 3 blocks away. The morning air was crisp and cool, and he breathed it in deeply. The city was beautiful at this hour, quiet and peaceful before the chaos of the day began. He waited at the stop with a few other early morning workers, nodding politely to those he recognized. The bus arrived right on time, and Joseph climbed aboard, paying his fare and taking a seat near the middle. The ride to the school took 35 minutes, and Joseph spent the time watching the city pass by, thinking about the day ahead, planning which areas of the school needed the most attention. The school was a large brick building that had stood for over 60 years. It served students from grade 6 through grade 12, over 800 children passing through its halls every day. Joseph had worked here for 18 years, ever since Maria was 4 years old. He knew every corner of this building, every squeaky floorboard, every window that stuck, every radiator that clanked. He arrived at 6:15, unlocking the side entrance with his key and stepping into the quiet hallway. The silence was almost sacred at this hour, before the noise and energy of hundreds of teenagers filled the space. Joseph went to the janitor's closet and began gathering his supplies, his old metal bucket, his reliable mop, his cleaning solutions, his rags. These were his tools, and he treated them with respect. He started on the first floor, working methodically from one end to the other. He swept the floors, mopped up any spills or tracked in dirt, wiped down the water fountains, checked the bathrooms to make sure they were clean and stocked. He worked with steady rhythm, finding a kind of meditation in the repetitive motions. This was honest work, work that mattered even if others did not see it that way. As he cleaned, he thought about the students who would soon fill these halls. They were all someone's child, someone's hope for the future, just like Maria was his. Some of them came from difficult homes, some struggled with learning, some felt invisible and alone. Joseph always tried to acknowledge them, to offer a kind word or a smile when he could. He remembered one boy, Thomas, a shy 14-year-old who always said good morning to him. Most students walked right past Joseph as if he were part of the furniture, but not Thomas. That boy had been raised right, taught to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of their job or status. By 7:30, the teachers began arriving, parking their cars and hurrying in with their bags full of papers and books. A few nodded to Joseph, but most were too distracted or too rushed to notice him. He understood. Everyone had their own concerns, their own pressures. He did not take it personally. He simply continued his work, moving up to the second floor to repeat the process. The building had 4 floors, and by the time he finished the basic morning cleaning, it would be nearly noon. Joseph's thoughts drifted back to Anna as he worked. They had met when they were both 19, working at a small factory on the outskirts of the city. She had been so full of life, so full of laughter. She could find joy in the smallest things: a sunny day, a good song on the radio, a perfectly ripe apple from the market. When she got sick, when the cancer came, she faced it with the same grace she had brought to everything else in her life. She never complained, never asked why me. She just held Joseph's hand and told him to take care of their baby girl. "Make sure she gets everything we never had," Anna had whispered in those final days. "Promise me." And Joseph had promised. He kept that promise every single day. He worked overtime whenever it was offered. He skipped meals sometimes to save money for Maria's books or supplies. He lived in this small apartment instead of somewhere nicer because the rent was cheap and every saved dollar could go into Maria's education fund. He wore the same clothes year after year, walked instead of taking taxis, brought lunch from home instead of buying it. None of it felt like sacrifice. It felt like love, like purpose, like the most important work he would ever do. Around 10 in the morning, Joseph took his break in the small janitor's office in the basement. He sat in the creaky chair and ate the sandwich he had packed, ham and cheese on bread he had bought on sale. He drank water from his thermos and allowed himself these 15 minutes of rest. The office was cluttered, but organized in its own way, with supplies stacked on metal shelves and a small desk covered in work orders and schedules. On the wall was a calendar, and Joseph had circled Maria's graduation date in red marker. 3 months away. 3 months until he would watch his daughter walk across that stage and receive her diploma. 3 months until he would see the fulfillment of everything he and Anna had dreamed of. After his break, Joseph returned to work. He moved through the 3rd floor, then started on the 4th. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, creating patterns of light on the freshly mopped floors. He took satisfaction in seeing the hallways clean and bright, in knowing that he had played a small part in creating an environment where young people could learn and grow. It was not glamorous work, but it was meaningful work, and Joseph had never needed glamour. He needed purpose, and he had that in abundance. By 3 in the afternoon, the students began pouring out of classrooms, their voices echoing through the corridors. Joseph stepped aside to let them pass, his mop and bucket tucked against the wall. They rushed by in groups, laughing and talking, some of them running despite the rules against it. Joseph watched them with a gentle smile. They reminded him of Maria at that age, full of energy and dreams, and the certainty that the world held infinite possibilities. He hoped they were right. He hoped the world would be kind to them. As the crowd thinned, Thomas appeared, walking slowly with his backpack slung over one shoulder. The boy stopped when he saw Joseph and smiled. "Good afternoon, Mr. Joseph," he said. "How are you today?" Joseph felt warmth spread through his chest. "I am well, Thomas. Thank you for asking," he replied. "How was your day?" "It was good, sir. I got an A on my history test," Thomas said, his face lighting up. Joseph reached out and patted the boy's shoulder. "That is wonderful. Your parents must be very proud. Work hard and good things will come to you." Thomas nodded and continued on his way, and Joseph felt grateful that there were still young people in the world who understood basic kindness and respect. Joseph finished his work for the day around 5 in the evening. He returned his supplies to the closet, locked up the areas he was responsible for, and punched out on the time clock. The walk to the bus stop felt longer in the evening, his body tired from the day's labor. But it was a good tired, the kind that came from honest effort. He rode the bus home, watching the city transition from day to night, the streetlights flickering on one by one. Back in his apartment, Joseph heated up leftover soup for dinner and ate it while watching the evening news. He did not own much. His television was old and small, his furniture was second-hand, his dishes were mismatched. but he had a roof over his head and food in his belly, and a daughter he loved more than life itself. He called Maria after dinner, and they talked for nearly an hour. She told him about her classes, about the lesson plan she was developing for her teaching practicum, about her friends and their plans for the weekend. Joseph listened to every word, asking questions, offering encouragement, feeling his heart swell with love and pride. After they said goodnight, Joseph sat in his chair by the window and looked out at the city lights. He thought about his life, about the path that had brought him here. He had not achieved wealth or fame or status, but he had lived with integrity. He had loved deeply. He had raised a good daughter. He had done his best to leave every place better than he found it, even if that just meant mopping a floor or wiping down a sink. Tomorrow he would wake up at 5 in the morning and do it all again, and he was at peace with that. This was his life, simple and quiet and meaningful in ways that could not be measured by money or titles. He did not know that tomorrow everything would change. He did not know that one moment of instinct and courage would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything he believed about himself and the world. He did not know that his quiet, invisible life was about to become anything but invisible. For now he simply sat in the peaceful darkness of his small apartment, grateful for what he had, unaware of what was coming. The next day began like any other. Joseph woke at 5, went through his morning routine, ate his simple breakfast, and took the bus to the school. He arrived at 6:15, unlocked the side door, and began his work with the same steady rhythm he had maintained for 18 years. The morning passed quietly as he cleaned the first and second floors, his mind occupied with thoughts of Maria's upcoming graduation and the small celebration he was planning for her. He had been saving a little extra each month to take her to a nice restaurant, somewhere she had always wanted to go, but they could never afford. It would be a surprise, a way to show her how proud he was of everything she had accomplished. Around 11 in the morning, Joseph was on the 4th floor, working near the science wing. The hallway was empty. Most students were in class, and the only sound was the soft swish of his mop against the tile floor. He had his back turned to the stairwell, focused on removing a stubborn scuff mark, when he heard it. A scream, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Joseph dropped his mop instantly and spun around, his heart already racing. The scream had come from the direction of the east stairwell, the one that connected all 4 floors with metal railings and concrete steps. He ran toward the sound, his work boots pounding against the floor, his breath coming quick. As he rounded the corner, he saw her, a young girl, maybe 13 or 14 years old, hanging from the railing on the 4th floor landing. She must have been leaning over to look down or pick something up and lost her balance. Her feet were dangling in the air, her hands gripping the metal bar with white knuckles, her face frozen in terror. Below her was a drop of nearly 40 feet to the concrete floor of the ground level. If she fell, she would not survive. Joseph did not think. There was no time to think. His body moved on pure instinct, driven by the same force that had made him a father, that had made him promise Anna he would protect their child, that had shaped every decision of his life. He sprinted the last few feet and threw himself forward, wrapping both arms around the girl's waist, just as her grip on the railing began to slip. Her fingers lost their hold, and she screamed again, but Joseph had her. He pulled her back with all his strength, his muscles straining, his back protesting. But he did not let go. He hauled her over the railing and onto the solid ground of the landing, both of them collapsing in a heap on the floor. From his chest. For a moment, his hands were shaking. Neither of them moved. The girl was sobbing, heart was hammering, her whole body trembling. Slowly, Joseph sat up and looked at her. She was small and delicate, with long dark hair and tear-streaked cheeks. Her school uniform was disheveled, and her hands were scraped from gripping the metal railing. "You are safe now," Joseph said softly, his voice still unsteady from the adrenaline. "You are safe. I have you." The girl looked up at him with wide eyes, still crying, still shaking. She tried to speak, but could not seem to form the words. Joseph gently helped her to her feet, keeping a steady hand on her shoulder. "Can you stand? Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked. She shook her head, though her legs were wobbling. Joseph guided her to sit down on the top step, away from the railing, and knelt beside her. "Just breathe," he said. "Slow breaths, in and out. You are going to be okay." By now, a teacher had emerged from a nearby classroom, drawn by the screaming. Her face went pale when she saw the girl's condition and the position of Joseph near the railing. "What happened?" she asked, rushing over. "The girl almost fell," Joseph explained simply. "She was hanging from the railing. I caught her in time." The teacher's hand flew to her mouth in shock. She immediately pulled out her phone to call the school office while Joseph stayed with the girl, speaking to her in low, calming tones. Within minutes, the hallway filled with people. The principal arrived, followed by the school nurse, then several more teachers. They surrounded the girl, asking her questions, checking her for injuries, trying to understand what had happened. Joseph stood back, giving them space, his role complete. The nurse examined the girl's scraped hands and pronounced her physically unharmed, though clearly in shock. The principal, a stern woman named Mrs. Novak, turned to Joseph. "You saved her life," she said, her voice filled with something Joseph rarely heard directed at him. "Respect. If you had not been here, if you had not acted so quickly, we would be dealing with a tragedy right now." Joseph felt uncomfortable with the attention. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other and looked down at his worn boots. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. "She needed help. I helped. That is all." But Mrs. Novak shook her head. Not everyone would have reacted that fast. Not everyone would have put themselves at risk like that. "You are a hero, Mr. Joseph." The word made Joseph even more uncomfortable. He was not a hero. He was just a janitor who had been in the right place at the right time. The girl's parents were called, and Mrs. Novak insisted that Joseph stay until they arrived. He wanted to get back to his work, to retreat into the comfortable anonymity of his daily routine. But the principal was firm. "They will want to thank you," she said. "Please wait." So Joseph waited, standing awkwardly in the hallway while the girl sat with the nurse, wrapped in a blanket, sipping water. Other students had been ushered away, back to their classrooms, though word of what happened was already spreading through the school like wildfire. 30 minutes later, a woman burst through the main entrance on the 4th floor, her high heels clicking rapidly against the tile. She was elegantly dressed, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless, but her face was a mask of panic and fear. She ran to her daughter and pulled her into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my baby, oh, thank God," she kept saying over and over. The girl clung to her mother and cried fresh tears, all the shock and fear pouring out of her, now that she was safe in her mother's arms. Mrs. Novak approached the woman and spoke to her in low tones, explaining what had happened and gesturing toward Joseph. The woman looked over at him, her eyes red and swollen, and walked toward him, still holding her daughter's hand. "You saved my little girl," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved Eliska's life." Joseph nodded, not knowing what to say. "I am glad I was there," he managed. The woman reached out and took his hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I do not know how to repay you." Joseph gently extracted his hand. "No repayment is necessary," he said. "I am just happy she is safe. Please take care of her." The woman nodded, still crying, and led her daughter away. Joseph watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving him shaky and tired. Mrs. Novak put a hand on his shoulder. "Take the rest of the day off," she said. "Go home and rest. You have earned it." Joseph wanted to protest. There was still work to be done, but the principal's expression left no room for argument. He nodded, retrieved his things from the janitor's closet, and left the school. The bus ride home felt surreal. Joseph kept replaying the moment in his mind, the sound of the girl's scream, the sight of her dangling from the railing, the feel of her weight in his arms as he pulled her to safety. His hands were still trembling slightly. He looked down at them, these old, calloused hands that had mopped 1,000 floors and fixed 100 broken things, and wondered at what they had just done. He had saved a life. The thought was overwhelming. Back in his apartment, Joseph sat in his chair by the window and stared out at the city. He felt strange, unmoored, as if the routine that had anchored his life for so long had suddenly been disrupted. He called Maria and told her what had happened. Her reaction was immediate and emotional. "Papa, oh my God, are you okay? You could have been hurt," she said, her voice high with worry. Joseph assured her he was fine, that everything had happened so fast he had not even thought about the danger. "I am so proud of you," Maria said, her voice thick with tears. "You are the best man I know." Joseph felt his own eyes sting. "I love you, my sunshine," he said softly. "I love you too, Papa," Maria replied. After they hung up, Joseph sat in the growing darkness and thought about Anna. She would have been proud too. She had always believed in doing the right thing, in helping others without expectation of reward or recognition. "You have a good heart, Joseph," she used to tell him. "Never lose that." He had not lost it. Even after all these years, even after all the hardship and struggle, he had kept his heart open and kind. And today, that kindness had saved a young girl's life. Joseph did not expect anything to come from the incident. He assumed that tomorrow he would return to work, resume his normal routine, and the event would fade into memory. The girl and her family would move on with their lives, and he would continue with his. That was how the world worked. People like him, invisible people who did invisible work, did not get recognized or rewarded. They simply did their jobs and went home. And Joseph was fine with that. He had never needed recognition. He had never needed to be seen. He just needed to know that he had done the right thing, and he did know that. It was enough. But as he sat there in his chair, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, Joseph had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. He did not know that the woman who had thanked him with tears in her eyes would go home and tell her husband everything. He did not know that the husband would ask questions, would learn Joseph's name, would find out where he lived and what kind of life he led. He did not know that tomorrow a man in an expensive suit would appear at the school gates, looking for him. He did not know that the simple act of catching a falling girl would open a door to a world he had only ever seen from the outside, looking in. For now, Joseph simply sat in the quiet darkness of his small apartment, grateful that Eliska was safe, unaware that his invisible life was about to become very visible indeed. Joseph returned to work the next morning with the same routine he had followed for 18 years. He woke at 5, made his coffee and toast, took the bus to the school, and unlocked the side entrance at 6:15. The events of yesterday felt distant now, almost dreamlike, as if they had happened to someone else. He had saved a girl's life, yes, but now it was time to return to normal. Time to get back to the work that defined his days and gave his life structure and meaning. He started on the first floor, as always, sweeping and mopping the long corridors with practiced efficiency. The familiar rhythm of the work was comforting, grounding him after the chaos and adrenaline of the day before. A few teachers who passed by stopped to shake his hand or pat him on the shoulder, offering words of congratulation and praise. Joseph accepted their thanks with quiet humility, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for their kindness. By mid-morning, however, the initial excitement had faded, and the school had returned to its normal pace. Students rushed through the halls between classes, teachers stood in doorways monitoring the flow of traffic, and Joseph moved among them like a ghost, invisible once more. Around 10:30, Joseph was cleaning the windows near the main entrance when he saw a black car pull up to the front gates. It was an expensive vehicle, sleek and polished, the kind that did not usually appear in this neighborhood. A man stepped out of the back seat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his early 50s, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. Even from a distance, Joseph could see that this was a man of wealth and power. The way he carried himself, the confidence in his stride, the expensive watch glinting on his wrist, everything about him spoke of a world Joseph had never inhabited. The man walked through the gates and approached the main entrance. Joseph stepped aside with his cleaning supplies, assuming the man would simply walk past him like everyone else did. But instead, the man stopped directly in front of him. His eyes, dark and intense, locked onto Joseph's face. "Are you Joseph Novotny?" the man asked. His voice was deep and measured, the voice of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. Joseph felt a flutter of uncertainty in his chest. "Yes, sir." "I am Joseph," he replied, confused about why this stranger knew his name. The man extended his hand. "My name is Viktor Kearney," he said. "I am Eliska's father." The realization hit Joseph like a wave. This was the husband of the woman who had thanked him yesterday, the father of the girl he had saved. Joseph quickly wiped his hand on his jumpsuit, suddenly very aware of how he must look in his worn work clothes and scuffed boots, standing before this immaculately dressed man, and shook Victor's hand. The handshake was firm, almost crushing. "I wanted to meet you in person," Victor continued. "I wanted to thank you for what you did for my daughter. You saved her life, Mr. Novotny." Joseph felt his face flush with embarrassment. "I only did what anyone would have done, sir," he said quietly. "Your daughter was in danger, and I helped her. That is all." Victor's expression remained serious, almost stern. "No," he said firmly. "Not everyone would have acted as you did. Most people would have hesitated, would have called for help, would have been too afraid to put themselves at risk. But you did not hesitate. You acted immediately, and selflessly. That is not something I take lightly. There was a weight to Victor's words that made Joseph uncomfortable. He shifted his cleaning bucket to his other hand and glanced toward the hallway, wishing he could escape back to his work. "I am very glad Eliska is safe," Joseph said. "How is she doing today?" Victor's expression softened slightly. "She is shaken, but physically unharmed, thanks to you. My wife has barely let her out of her sight since yesterday. We are keeping her home from school for a few days to recover from the shock." Joseph nodded. "That is good. She needs time with her family. Please give her my best wishes." Victor studied Joseph's face for a long moment, his dark eyes searching for something. "I would like to do something for you," he said, "to show my gratitude. Money, a reward, anything you need." Joseph immediately shook his head. "No, sir, that is not necessary. I do not want any payment for helping your daughter." It was not about money. It was about doing what was right. Victor's jaw tightened. "I understand your position, but you must understand mine. You gave me back my child. There is no amount of money that could repay that debt, but I still want to try. Please let me help you in some way." Joseph felt torn. Part of him wanted to simply walk away, to retreat into his comfortable invisibility and forget this conversation ever happened. But another part of him, a part he rarely acknowledged, wondered what it would be like to accept help, to let someone ease the burden he had carried alone for so many years. He thought of Maria, of the graduation coming in 3 months, of the small apartment and the constant worry about money. But then he thought of Anna, of the values they had shared, of the promise he had made to live with integrity. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Cerny," Joseph said carefully, "but I cannot accept money for saving your daughter. It would feel wrong to me. It would feel like I did it for the reward, and I did not." Victor seemed to respect this answer, though his expression remained serious. "You are a rare man, Joseph Novotny," he said. "Most people in this world would jump at the chance for financial gain. But not you. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, which he handed to Joseph. "This has my personal phone number on it. If you ever need anything at all, I want you to call me. Please, consider it not a payment, but an open door. A way for me to help if circumstances ever require it." Joseph took the card, feeling the expensive weight of the paper between his fingers. He looked down at it and saw Victor's name embossed in elegant letters, along with the name of a company Joseph did not recognize. He slipped the card into his jumpsuit pocket. "Thank you, sir," he said. "I will keep it, though I do not expect I will need to use it." Victor smiled for the first time, though it did not quite reach his eyes. "You never know what the future holds," he said. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." They stood there for another moment, these two men from completely different worlds, connected by a single act of courage and kindness. Then Victor extended his hand again, and Joseph shook it. "Thank you again, Mr. Novotny," Victor said. "You will always have my gratitude and my respect." With that, he turned and walked back to his waiting car. Joseph watched as the vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street, leaving him standing alone near the entrance with his mop and bucket. Joseph returned to his work, but his mind kept drifting back to the conversation. There had been something in Victor's eyes, something intense and searching, that made him uneasy. It was not just gratitude. It was something else. something Joseph could not quite identify. He pushed the thoughts aside and focused on cleaning the windows, on the simple concrete task in front of him. The business card sat in his pocket, like a small weight, a reminder that his life had somehow shifted, even though he could not yet see how or why. That evening, Joseph sat in his apartment and looked at the card again. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the quality of the paper, reading Victor's name over and over. He thought about calling Mariah and telling her about the encounter, but decided against it. She would worry, would ask too many questions, would want him to accept help, even though he could not. Instead, he placed the card on his nightstand next to the photograph of Anna. "I do not know what this means," he whispered to her image. "I do not know what he wants from me. But I will stay true to what you taught me. I will not compromise who I am, no matter what doors might open." The next few days passed quietly. Joseph returned to his routine, and the school slowly forgot about the dramatic rescue. Students stopped pointing at him in the hallways, teachers stopped mentioning it, and life returned to normal. But Joseph could not shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. He found himself thinking about Victor Cerny at odd moments, wondering what kind of man he was, what kind of world he lived in, what it would be like to have that kind of power and wealth. These thoughts made him uncomfortable because they felt like a betrayal of the simple life he had chosen, the life Anna had valued. 1 week after meeting Victor, Joseph received a phone call. It was late evening, and he had just finished dinner. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Hello, this is Joseph," he said. "Mr. Novotny," a woman's voice replied. "This is Eva Markova. I am Mr. Cerny's personal assistant. He asked me to call and invite you to dinner tomorrow evening at 7. He would very much like to speak with you again." Joseph felt his stomach tighten. "That is very kind, but I do not think that is necessary," he said carefully. "I understand your hesitation," Eva replied smoothly. But Mr. Cerny was quite insistent. He would consider it a personal favor if you would accept. "The car will pick you up at your address at 6:30. Please, Mr. Novotny." It would mean a great deal to him. Joseph stood in his small kitchen, the phone pressed to his ear, torn between refusing outright and wondering if perhaps he owed Victor this much. The man's daughter could have died. Maybe one dinner was not too much to ask. "All right," he said finally. "I will come." "Thank you," Eva said warmly. "The car will be there tomorrow at 6:30. Have a good evening, Mr. Novotny." She hung up before Joseph could change his mind. The next evening, Joseph stood outside his apartment building at exactly 6:25, wearing the only suit he owned. It was the same suit he had worn to Anna's funeral 10 years ago, the same suit he wore to church on the rare occasions he attended. It was slightly too tight around the middle now, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, but it was clean and pressed. He had shined his dress shoes until they gleamed, though they could not hide the cracks in the leather or the worn-down heels. He felt self-conscious and out of place, like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. At precisely 6:30, the black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, a young man in a dark uniform, and opened the back door for Joseph. "Good evening, Mr. Novotny," he said politely. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Joseph climbed into the back seat, sinking into leather so soft it felt like sitting on a cloud. The interior of the car smelled of expensive cologne and new leather. There was a small television screen, a mini refrigerator, and more buttons and controls than Joseph knew what to do with. He sat rigidly, afraid to touch anything, his hands folded in his lap. The drive took them through the city, away from Joseph's modest neighborhood and toward the wealthy district on the eastern side. Joseph watched through the tinted windows as the buildings changed from worn apartment blocks to elegant townhouses, from corner markets to upscale boutiques. The streets became cleaner, the trees more numerous, the cars more expensive. This was a world he had seen only in photographs and television shows, a world that existed in the same city, but might as well have been on another planet. After 20 minutes, the car turned into a gated driveway. The driver spoke into an intercom, and the iron gates swung open, revealing a long driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges and flowering trees. At the end of the driveway stood a house that took Joseph's breath away. It was not just large, it was magnificent. 3 stories of pale stone and tall windows with columns flanking the entrance and a fountain in the circular drive. Lights glowed warmly from within, and Joseph could see crystal chandeliers through the windows. This was not a house. This was a mansion, a palace, a monument to wealth beyond anything Joseph had ever imagined. The car stopped at the entrance, and the driver opened Joseph's door. "Mr. Cerny is expecting you in the dining room, sir," he said. "Just ring the bell and someone will show you in." Joseph stepped out onto the cobblestone drive, his legs feeling unsteady. He walked to the massive wooden door and pressed the doorbell, hearing it chime somewhere deep within the house. Moments later, the door opened to reveal a woman in a crisp uniform, clearly a housekeeper. "Good evening, Mr. Novotny," she said with a warm smile. "Please come in. Mr. Cerny is waiting for you." Joseph stepped into the entrance hall and felt his breath catch again. The floor was polished marble that reflected the light from an enormous chandelier hanging overhead. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor, its banister gleaming. Paintings in ornate frames hung on the walls, and fresh flowers sat in crystal vases on antique tables. Joseph had never seen such luxury in his life. He followed the housekeeper through a series of corridors, each more elegant than the last, until they reached a set of double doors. She opened them and gestured for Joseph to enter. The dining room was stunning. A long table made of dark wood dominated the space, set with white linens, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses that caught the light from another chandelier. Victor stood at the far end of the room, still in a suit though he had removed his jacket and loosened his tie. When he saw Joseph, his face broke into a genuine smile. "Joseph, thank you for coming," he said, walking forward with his hand extended. "I know this must be overwhelming, but I wanted to meet with you properly, to talk without the constraints of a school hallway." Joseph shook his hand, acutely aware of how out of place he felt in this palace of wealth. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Cerny," he managed. "Your home is very beautiful." "Please, call me Victor," the other man said, gesturing to a chair near the head of the table. "Sit, please. Make yourself comfortable." Joseph sat down carefully, afraid he might somehow damage the delicate chair. A moment later, a server appeared with a bottle of wine. Victor waved him off when he approached Joseph's glass. "What would you prefer to drink, Joseph?" Victor asked. "Wine, water, something else?" "Just water, please," Joseph replied. He had never been much of a drinker, and tonight he wanted to keep his wits about him. The server filled Joseph's glass with water from a crystal pitcher and disappeared as silently as he had come. Victor sat down across from Joseph and studied him with those intense dark eyes. I want to start by saying again how grateful I am for what you did, he said. My wife has not stopped talking about you. Eliska asks about you every day. You have become something of a hero in our household. Joseph felt heat rise to his cheeks. I am no hero, Victor, he said quietly. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Victor shook his head slowly. That is where you are wrong, my friend. Being in the right place means nothing if you do not have the courage to act, and you acted without hesitation, without thought for your own safety. That is the definition of heroism. Before Joseph could protest again, the servers began bringing out the first course. It was a soup of some kind, presented in delicate porcelain bowls with garnishes Joseph did not recognize. He picked up his spoon, the same way he saw Victor do, and tasted it cautiously. It was delicious, rich and flavorful in a way that his simple home-cooked meals never were. They ate in silence for a few moments before Victor spoke again. Tell me about yourself, Joseph. I know you work at the school as a janitor, but I want to know more. Where are you from? What is your story? Joseph set down his spoon, uncomfortable with the personal attention. There is not much to tell, he said. I grew up in a small town north of here. My father worked in a factory, my mother cleaned houses. I left school when I was 16 to help support the family. I met my wife Anna when we were both 19. We married, had a daughter, and tried to build a good life. Anna got sick 10 years ago and passed away. Since then, I have been raising our daughter Maria on my own. She is in her final year of university, studying to be a teacher. That is my story. Simple and ordinary. Victor listened intently, his expression thoughtful. There is nothing ordinary about raising a child alone while working a demanding job, he said. That takes strength and dedication. You should be proud. Joseph felt a lump form in his throat at the mention of Maria. I am proud, he said softly. She is the best thing in my life. Everything I do for her. Victor nodded slowly. I understand that completely. I would do anything for Eliska. Anything. That is why your actions meant so much to me. You protected the most precious thing in my world. The servers cleared the soup bowls and brought out the main course, a perfectly cooked piece of meat with vegetables and a sauce that looked like art on the plate. Joseph ate slowly, trying to match Victor's pace, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the richness of the food and the opulence of his surroundings. As they ate, Victor asked more questions. He wanted to know about Joseph's daily routine, about his hopes for Maria, about his views on life and work, and what mattered most. Joseph answered honestly, though he could not understand why a man like Victor would care about the mundane details of his existence. After dinner, Victor led Joseph to a study on the second floor. The room was lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, and a massive desk sat near the window overlooking the garden. Victor poured himself a small glass of whiskey and offered one to Joseph, who declined. They sat in comfortable leather chairs facing each other, and Victor's expression became more serious. I asked you here tonight for a reason, beyond just thanking you, he said. I have been thinking about you all week, Joseph, about who you are and what you did, and I have a proposition for you. Joseph felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. What kind of proposition? He asked carefully. Victor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his dark eyes locked on Joseph's face. I am a businessman, as you might have guessed. I own several companies, invest in real estate, manage various ventures. I have built an empire through hard work and strategic thinking. But one thing I have learned over the years is that the most valuable asset in any enterprise is not money or connections or even intelligence. It is character, integrity, the kind of moral compass that guides a person to do the right thing even when no one is watching. He paused, letting his words sink in. You have that quality, Joseph. You demonstrated it when you saved my daughter without a thought for recognition or reward. You demonstrated it again when you refused my offer of money. And you demonstrate it every day by working hard to give your daughter a better life than you had. That is rare. That is precious. And that is something I need. Joseph did not know what to say. He sat in silence, waiting for Victor to continue, his heart beating faster with each passing second. I want to offer you a job, Victor said simply. Not as a janitor, though there is honor in that work. I want to offer you a position in my security team. You would be responsible for protecting my family, my home, my assets. The pay would be substantial, far more than you make now. You would have full benefits, a retirement plan, opportunities for advancement. You could move out of that small apartment, give Maria everything she needs without struggling. You could have the life you have worked so hard to achieve, but have never been able to reach. The offer hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible. Joseph felt dizzy, as if the room were spinning around him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Victor continued, his voice gentle now. I know this is a lot to consider. I am not asking for an answer tonight. Take your time. Think about it. Talk to your daughter if you want. But know that this offer is genuine, and it comes with my deepest respect for who you are. You saved my child, Joseph. Let me help save your future. Joseph barely slept that night. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Victor's offer over and over in his mind. A job in security with substantial pay, benefits, a retirement plan, the chance to give Maria everything she deserved without the constant struggle and sacrifice. It was everything he had dreamed of, but never dared to hope for. And yet something about it troubled him deeply, something he could not quite name. He thought about Anna, about what she would say if she were here. Would she tell him to take the opportunity, to accept this gift that had fallen into his lap? Or would she remind him that easy answers often came with hidden costs? When morning came, Joseph went through his routine mechanically, his mind still churning with questions and doubts. He took the bus to school and began his work, but he could not focus. He mopped the same section of floor twice without realizing it. He forgot which bathrooms he had already cleaned. His hands moved through familiar motions, while his thoughts spun in endless circles. Around mid-morning, he took his break in the small janitor's office and pulled out his phone. He needed to talk to someone, and there was only one person in the world he truly trusted. Maria answered on the second ring. "Papa, hi. Is everything okay?" she asked, concern already in her voice. She knew he never called during work hours unless something was wrong. "I am fine, sunshine," Joseph said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "I just need to talk to you about something important." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay. What is it?" Maria said. Joseph took a deep breath and told her everything. The rescue, the meeting with Victor, the dinner at the mansion, and finally the job offer. He laid it all out as clearly as he could, trying to present the facts without letting his own confusion color the story. When he finished, Maria was silent for a long moment. "Papa," she said finally, her voice soft and serious, "that is an incredible opportunity. Do you understand how much this could change our lives? You would not have to work so hard anymore. You could have a comfortable retirement. We could actually have financial security for the first time ever." "I know," Joseph said quietly. "I know all of that." "Then why do you sound so uncertain?" Maria asked. "What is holding you back?" Joseph struggled to put his feelings into words. "I do not know," he admitted. "Something about it feels wrong. Not wrong like dishonest or bad, but wrong like it does not fit who I am. I am a janitor, Maria. I clean floors. What do I know about security work, about protecting wealthy people and their assets? I would be completely out of my depth." Maria's voice became firmer. "Papa, you saved a girl's life. You acted with courage and quick thinking when it mattered most. That sounds exactly like what security work requires. You are selling yourself short." "But it is not just about whether I could do the job," Joseph said. "It is about why Victor Hall is offering it. He does not know me. He has no idea if I would be good at this work. He is offering it out of gratitude, maybe even out of guilt. And I wonder if accepting it would be taking advantage of his emotions, of his need to repay a debt that does not actually exist." Maria sighed. "Papa, you are overthinking this. Sometimes good things happen to good people. Sometimes doing the right thing leads to positive consequences. Why can you not accept that?" "Because nothing in life is that simple," Joseph replied. "There are always strings attached, always expectations, always a cost hidden somewhere in the fine print." "I have lived 55 years, Maria, and I have learned that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is." "Then ask more questions," Maria said practically. "Call this Victor back and ask him exactly what the job would entail. Ask about the expectations, the responsibilities, the day-to-day reality. Get all the information before you make a decision. Do not say no just because you are afraid of change." Her words stung because they were partially true. Joseph was afraid of change, afraid of stepping outside the safe, familiar boundaries of his life. But he was also afraid of losing himself, of compromising the values that had guided him for decades in pursuit of comfort and security. After promising Maria he would think carefully about everything, he ended the call and sat in the quiet office, his head in his hands. The old photograph of him and Anna mocked him from the wall, her smile frozen in time, her eyes full of trust and love. "What would you do, Anna?" he whispered. "What would you tell me?" That evening, Joseph sat in his apartment with Victor's business card in his hand. He stared at the phone number for nearly an hour before finally gathering the courage to dial. The phone rang 3 times before Victor answered. "Joseph," he said warmly, clearly recognizing the number. "I was hoping you would call." "I have been thinking about your offer," Joseph said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "And I have some questions, if you do not mind." "Of course," Victor said immediately. "Ask me anything. I want you to have all the information you need." Joseph took a breath. "What exactly would this security job involve?" he asked. "What would my day-to-day responsibilities be?" Victor's tone became more businesslike. "You would be part of a team of 6 people responsible for protecting my family and property. The work would include monitoring security systems, conducting regular patrols of the estate, accompanying family members when they travel, and being prepared to respond to any potential threats. You would receive full training in all necessary skills: self-defense, emergency protocols, security technology. We would not expect you to know everything from day one. And the hours, Joseph asked. What would the schedule look like? It would be shift work, Victor explained. Typically 4 days on, 3 days off, with shifts rotating between day and night. When you are on duty, you would stay in staff quarters on the property so you can respond quickly if needed. When you are off, your time is your own. The pay would be 4 times what you currently make, with full health insurance, dental, vision, and a retirement contribution that matches 15% of your salary. Joseph did a quick calculation in his head and felt his stomach drop. 4 times his current salary would mean he could pay off all his debts within a year. He could move to a better apartment. He could save substantial money for emergencies. He could stop lying awake at night worrying about every unexpected expense. It was almost too much to comprehend. But why me? Joseph asked, the core question that had been nagging at him since the offer was made. Victor, you could hire someone with actual security experience, someone with military or police training. Why offer this to a 55-year-old janitor? There was a pause before Victor answered, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and sincere. Because experience and training can be taught, Joseph, but character cannot. I have hired plenty of people with impressive resumes who turned out to be lazy, dishonest, or unreliable. I have learned the hard way that credentials mean nothing if the person lacks integrity. When I saw how you reacted to save Aliska, when I saw how you refused payment and remained humble despite doing something extraordinary, I knew you were the kind of person I want protecting my family. Someone who will do the right thing, not because they are paid to, but because it is who they are at their core. The words were persuasive, even moving, but Joseph still felt uncertain. Can I have more time to think about it? He asked. I need to consider this carefully to make sure it is the right choice for me and for Maria. Of course, Victor said immediately. Take all the time you need. But Joseph, I want you to know something else. This is not charity. This is not me trying to ease my guilt or pay off a debt. This is me recognizing talent and character when I see it and wanting to bring that into my organization. If you take this job, I will expect you to work hard and earn your salary. I will expect professionalism and dedication. This is a real opportunity, not a handout. Joseph felt oddly reassured by this. The idea of earning his place felt better than the idea of being given something out of pity. I understand, he said. Thank you for being honest with me. I will give you my answer within a week. That is fair, Victor replied. And Joseph, one more thing. Come by the estate tomorrow afternoon, if you are free. I want to show you the security operation, introduce you to the team, let you see what the work actually looks like. It might help you make your decision. Joseph agreed, and they set a time for 2 in the afternoon. The next day, Joseph requested the afternoon off from school, something he rarely did, and took a bus to the wealthy district where Victor's estate was located. The gates opened for him when he pressed the intercom, and he walked up the long driveway feeling just as out of place as he had during the dinner. Victor met him at the door, dressed more casually in slacks and a sweater, and led him around the side of the house to a separate building that Joseph had not noticed during his first visit. This is our security headquarters, Victor explained as they entered. Inside was a room filled with monitors showing different angles of the property, The gates, the driveway, the garden, the perimeter walls. A man in his 30s sat at the desk, watching the screens with focused attention. "This is Marek, head of my security team," Viktor said. "Marek, this is Josef Novotny, the man I told you about." Marek stood and shook Josef's hand with a firm grip. "Good to meet you, sir," he said respectfully. "Mr. Cerny has told us all about what you did for his daughter. That took real guts." Marek spent the next hour walking Josef through the operation. He showed him how the camera systems worked, explained the patrol routes, demonstrated the alarm systems and emergency protocols. He introduced Josef to 2 other security team members, both professional and well-trained but friendly and welcoming. They did not treat Josef like an outsider or question why Viktor wanted to hire him. They simply accepted him as a potential colleague and showed him the ropes with patience and clarity. As Josef watched them work, listened to their explanations, and saw the sophisticated systems they managed, he felt both intimidated and intrigued. This was so far removed from mopping floors and cleaning windows that it might as well be a different universe. But there was also something appealing about it, something that called to a part of himself he had long suppressed. The part that wanted to be more than invisible, the part that wanted to matter, the part that wanted to protect and serve in a way that felt significant. After the tour, Viktor walked Josef back to the main house. "So what do you think?" he asked. Josef looked back at the security building, then at the magnificent estate, then at Viktor's expectant face. "I think it is overwhelming," he said honestly. "I think I am both terrified and tempted. I think I need to go home and really search my soul about whether this is right for me." Viktor nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "That is all I ask," he said. "Be honest with yourself about what you want and what you can handle. Then make your choice. Whatever you decide, I will respect it." Josef spent the next 3 days in a state of internal turmoil. He went to work at the school each morning, performed his duties with mechanical precision, and returned home each evening to sit in his small apartment, wrestling with the decision that would change everything. He made lists of pros and cons on scraps of paper, weighing the financial security against his fear of the unknown, the opportunity for a better life against the comfort of familiar routine. The lists always came out even, offering no clear answer, no obvious path forward. On the 4th day, something happened that shifted his perspective. Josef was cleaning the 3rd-floor hallway when he overheard 2 teachers talking in a classroom with the door half open. He did not mean to eavesdrop, but their voices carried clearly into the corridor. "Did you hear they are cutting the janitorial budget next year?" one teacher said. "They are letting 2 people go and reducing hours for the rest. The school board says they need to reallocate funds to technology upgrades." The other teacher sighed. "That is terrible. These people work so hard for so little already. I wonder who will be let go." Josef felt his blood run cold. He stood frozen in the hallway, his mop dripping water onto the floor he had just cleaned. He had heard rumors of budget cuts, whispers in the break room, but he had dismissed them as gossip. Now it seemed the rumors were true. He was one of the oldest janitors on staff, and while his work was reliable, the school might see him as expendable compared to younger workers who could be paid less. The security of his job, the foundation on which he had built his entire life for 18 years, was suddenly uncertain. That evening, Josef called Viktor. "I have made my decision," he said when Viktor answered. "I would like to accept your job offer if it is still available." There was a pause on the other end. Then Victor's voice came through, warm and pleased. "Joseph, I am very happy to hear that. Yes, the offer is absolutely still available. When can you start?" Joseph thought about the school, about giving proper notice, about doing things the right way. "I need to give 2 weeks' notice at my current job," he said. "I owe them that much. They have been good to me over the years." Victor's respect was evident in his response. "Of course, that is the right thing to do. 2 weeks from today, then. I will have my assistant send you all the necessary paperwork and schedule your training. Welcome to the team, Joseph." After hanging up, Joseph sat in silence, his hands trembling slightly. He had just made the biggest decision of his life since marrying Anna, and he felt a mixture of excitement and terror. He called Maria and told her the news. She screamed with joy, her happiness pouring through the phone line, and Joseph found himself smiling despite his nervousness. "Papa, I am so proud of you," she said. "This is going to be amazing. You deserve this. I love you." "I love you too, sunshine," Joseph replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I am doing this for both of us, so we can have the life your mother always wanted for you." The next morning, Joseph arrived at work early and went directly to Mrs. Novak's office. He knocked on the door and waited until she called him in. He stood before her desk, his hands clasped in front of him, and said the words he had rehearsed all night. "Mrs. Novak, I am here to give you my 2 weeks' notice. I have accepted another job opportunity, and my last day will be 2 weeks from today." The principal looked up at him with surprise. "Joseph, are you sure?" she asked. "You have been with us for so long. We value your work here." "I am sure," Joseph said quietly, "and I am grateful for all the years I have spent here, but it is time for me to move on." Mrs. Novak accepted his resignation with grace, though she seemed genuinely sad to lose him. The news spread quickly through the school. Some teachers stopped by to wish him well, to tell him he would be missed, to express surprise that the quiet janitor who had worked among them for nearly 2 decades was leaving. A few students, including Thomas, sought him out to say goodbye. Thomas looked close to tears. "I am going to miss seeing you every day, Mr. Joseph," the boy said. "You always made me feel like I mattered." Joseph put a hand on his shoulder. "You do matter, Thomas," he said gently. "Never forget that. Be kind to people, work hard, and good things will come to you." The boy nodded and hurried away before he could start crying. The 2 weeks passed in a blur. Joseph trained his replacement, a younger man named David, who seemed eager but inexperienced. Joseph showed him all the tricks he had learned over 18 years, which cleaning supplies worked best on which surfaces, which areas of the building needed extra attention, which teachers preferred their classrooms cleaned in the morning versus the afternoon. He passed on his knowledge with the same care and thoroughness he brought to everything else, wanting to leave the school in good hands even though he was moving on. On his final day, the staff organized a small farewell gathering in the teacher's lounge. There was cake and coffee, and Mrs. Novak gave a short speech about Joseph's dedication and the dramatic rescue that had made him a local hero. Joseph stood awkwardly while people clapped, uncomfortable with the attention, but touched by the gesture. Several teachers hugged him, wished him well in his new position, told him to stay in touch. Thomas gave him a handmade card with a drawing of Joseph saving Eliska, the picture crude but heartfelt. Joseph carefully folded the card and put it in his pocket, knowing he would keep it forever. When the gathering ended, Joseph did one final walk through the building. He moved slowly through the hallways he had cleaned thousands of times, past classrooms where he had emptied trash cans and wiped down desks, up staircases he had mopped until they shone. He touched the walls gently, said silent goodbyes to this place that had been his second home for so long. When he reached the fourth-floor stairwell, the place where he had caught Eliska, he stopped and stood there for several minutes. This was where everything had changed. This was the moment that had set his life on a new course. He whispered a quiet thank you to whatever force had put him in that exact spot, at that exact time. Joseph left the school at 5 p.m, walking out through the main entrance for the last time as an employee. He felt a profound sense of closure, of one chapter ending and another beginning. The next morning, he woke at 5 out of habit, but did not need to rush to catch the bus. Today was his first day at Victor's estate, the first day of his new life. He dressed carefully in the clothes that had been delivered to his apartment: black pants, a black shirt, sturdy boots designed for security work. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at him. At 7 a.m, the car arrived to take him to the estate. Marek greeted him at the security building with a firm handshake and a genuine smile. "Welcome to your first day, Joseph," he said. "We are going to start with basic training, get you familiar with all our systems and protocols. Do not worry if it feels overwhelming at first. Everyone feels that way in the beginning. You will pick it up faster than you think." Joseph nodded, grateful for the encouragement, and followed Marek inside. The first week was intense. Joseph learned how to operate the camera systems, monitor the feeds for unusual activity, log incidents in the security database. He learned the layout of the entire property, every entrance and exit, every blind spot, every vulnerable area. He practiced patrol routes until he could walk them in his sleep. He studied emergency protocols for fire, medical emergencies, potential intruders, natural disasters. Marek was a patient teacher, never making Joseph feel stupid for asking questions, always willing to explain things multiple times until Joseph understood. The physical training was harder. Joseph had stayed in decent shape from years of manual labor, but security work required different skills. He learned basic self-defense moves, how to properly restrain someone without causing injury, how to assess threats and respond appropriately. His body ached at the end of each training session, muscles he did not know he had screaming in protest. But he pushed through the discomfort, determined to prove that Victor's faith in him was not misplaced. The other team members accepted Joseph with surprising warmth. Besides Marek, there was Pavel, a former police officer in his 40s with a dry sense of humor. There was Lucas, a serious young man in his late 20s who had military training. There was Petra, the only woman on the team, who had a background in close protection and could apparently disable a grown man in 3 seconds flat. And there was old Radek, who was actually younger than Joseph, but had been doing security work for 30 years and had stories that made everyone laugh during breaks. They welcomed Joseph as one of their own, sharing their knowledge freely, inviting him to join them for meals, treating him with respect despite his lack of experience. Joseph settled into the rhythm of the work more easily than he had expected. The 4 days on, 3 days off schedule took some adjustment, but he found he appreciated the longer stretches of time off. He used those days to spend time with Maria, to clean his kultu apartment thoroughly, to sit in quiet contemplation and process everything that was changing in his life. The staff quarters where he stayed during his shifts were simple but comfortable, far nicer than his apartment, with a private room, a shared kitchen, and all the amenities he could need. His first actual security shift came at the end of his second week. Joseph was assigned to night patrol with Pavel, walking the grounds every 2 hours, checking doors and windows, ensuring everything was secure. It was a clear night, the stars visible above the estate, and Joseph found a strange peace in the quiet darkness. As they walked, Pavel talked about his years as a police officer, the cases he had worked, the reasons he had eventually left the force for private security. Joseph listened, grateful for the company and the distraction from his own nervousness. Around 2 in the morning, as they completed their third patrol, Joseph saw movement near the far wall of the property. He touched Pavel's arm and pointed. The older man immediately became alert, his hand moving to the radio on his belt. They approached cautiously, and as they got closer, Joseph could see it was just a cat, a stray that had somehow gotten onto the property. Pavel laughed quietly. "Good eyes, Joseph," he said. "Better to check and find nothing than to miss something important. You are going to do just fine at this work." By the end of his first month, Joseph had found his footing. He understood the systems, knew the routines, could handle most situations that arose with confidence. Victor stopped by the security building occasionally to check on him, always asking how he was adjusting, if he needed anything, if the work was what he had expected. Joseph answered honestly that it was challenging but rewarding, different but fulfilling. He felt useful in a way he had not felt in years, important in a way that cleaning floors had never made him feel. He was protecting people, keeping them safe, using his skills and judgment to prevent problems before they occurred. It gave him a sense of purpose that went beyond just earning a paycheck. 3 months into his new job, Joseph's life had transformed in ways he could hardly believe. He had moved to a better apartment, a 2-bedroom place in a safer neighborhood with actual insulation and windows that closed properly. He had paid off the debts that had haunted him for years. He had opened a savings account and watched it grow week by week. Maria's graduation was approaching, and Joseph had already bought tickets to the ceremony and made reservations at the finest restaurant in the city. For the first time in his adult life, he felt financially secure, and the relief was almost overwhelming. But something else had been growing alongside his sense of security, a nagging feeling that he could not quite shake. Joseph had always been observant, a skill honed by decades of working in spaces where he was invisible, where people forgot he was there. And Han taught and spoke freely. In his new role, that skill had only sharpened. He noticed things, small things, inconsistencies, patterns that did not quite add up. And the more he noticed, the more uncomfortable he became. It started with the visitors. Victor had many people coming and going from the estate. Business associates, he called them. Men in expensive suits who arrived in luxury cars and met with Victor in his study for hours at a time. That was normal enough for a wealthy businessman. But Joseph began to recognize some of these men from the news, from articles he had read about corruption investigations and financial scandals. He saw a city councilman who had been accused of taking bribes. He saw a real estate developer known for questionable land deals. He saw a banker who had barely escaped charges of money laundering. Joseph told himself he was being paranoid, that successful businessmen often associated with controversial figures, that it did not necessarily mean anything sinister. But then he noticed the late-night deliveries, trucks arriving at 2 or 3 in the morning, unloading crates in the garage, leaving before dawn. When Joseph asked Marek about them casually, the head of security had tensed visibly. "Just supplies for Mr. Cerny's businesses," he had said. "Nothing we need to worry about." The dismissive answer only made Joseph more curious. One night during his patrol, Joseph found a door to the basement level slightly ajar, a door that was usually locked and off-limits to security staff. He knew he should radio Marek and report it, follow protocol, but something made him hesitate. He looked around, saw no one, and made a decision that went against every rule he had been taught. He slipped through the door and descended the stairs into the basement. The space below was unlike the rest of the house. Where the upper floors were all elegant furnishings and tasteful art, the basement was cold and utilitarian. Concrete floors, metal shelving, harsh fluorescent lighting. Joseph moved quietly, his security training making his footsteps nearly silent. He passed storage rooms filled with ordinary household items, then came to a locked door with a keypad. He tried the handle on impulse and was shocked when it opened. Someone had forgotten to secure it properly. Inside was an office, but not the kind of office Joseph had ever seen before. The walls were covered with maps, photographs connected by red string, documents in plastic sleeves. Joseph stepped closer and began to read. His blood ran cold as he realized what he was looking at. These were not business documents. These were surveillance files on government officials, judges, police commissioners. There were photographs of people in compromising situations, detailed financial records that looked like evidence of blackmail payments, transcripts of conversations that must have been recorded illegally. Joseph's hands shook as he picked up a folder from the desk. Inside were documents related to a property development deal. As he read, he understood that Victor had used threats and intimidation to force landowners to sell their property for far less than it was worth. There were references to violence, to people who had refused and then mysteriously had accidents or financial ruin. Joseph set the folder down carefully, his mind reeling. Victor was not just a successful businessman. He was a criminal, possibly connected to organized crime, using blackmail and coercion to build his empire. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made Joseph freeze. He quickly but quietly moved behind a filing cabinet, pressing himself into the shadows. The door opened, and Victor entered with another man, someone Joseph did not recognize. They were deep in conversation, speaking in low tones. "We need to handle the Dvorak situation soon," the stranger said. "He is threatening to go to the authorities about the harbor contract." Victor's voice was cold and calm. "Then we remind him what happened to the last person who made threats. Show him the photographs we have of his weekend activities. Make it clear that cooperation is his only option." Joseph felt sick. He was hearing Victor casually discuss blackmail, possibly worse. The conversation continued for several minutes, Victor and the stranger going over various schemes and problems, solving them with threats and intimidation, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Finally they left, turning off the light and closing the door behind them. Joseph waited in the darkness for a full 10 minutes before daring to move. His heart was pounding so hard he thought they must be able to hear it throughout the entire house. He crept back up the stairs, closing the basement door carefully behind him, and returned to his patrol route as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Everything had changed. The job he had been so grateful for, the opportunity that had saved him from financial ruin, was built on a foundation of crime and corruption. Victor was not the honorable man Joseph had believed him to be. He was a criminal who used his wealth and power to hurt people, to manipulate and destroy anyone who stood in his way. Joseph finished his shift on autopilot, his mind spinning with the implications of what he had discovered. When his shift ended at 6 in the morning, he went to his room in the staff quarters, but could not sleep. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with an impossible decision. If he did nothing, if he kept quiet and continued working, he would be complicit in Victor's crimes. He would be taking money earned through the suffering of others. But if he went to the authorities, if he tried to expose what he had learned, he would be putting himself and Mariah in terrible danger. Victor had already shown he was willing to threaten and harm people who crossed him. There was also the question of evidence. Joseph had no proof of what he had seen and heard. He had been in that basement, office illegally, violating his employment agreement, and probably half a dozen laws. Anything he tried to report would be his word against Victor's, a former janitor against one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the city. Who would believe him? And even if they did, Victor clearly had connections with corrupt officials. Joseph's report might never go anywhere, and Victor would know he had betrayed him. Over the next few days, Joseph went through the motions of his job while internally falling apart. He smiled at his colleagues, performed his duties, acted as if everything were normal. But at night, he lay awake, tormented by what he knew. He thought about Anna, about the values she had instilled in him, about the promise he had made to always do the right thing. He thought about Maria, about the life he could give her with this job, about the danger he would put her in if he spoke up. He thought about Eliska, the innocent girl he had saved, growing up with a father who destroyed lives without remorse. 1 week after his discovery, Joseph was called to Victor's study. His stomach clenched with fear. Did Victor know he had been in the basement? Had someone seen him? He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor on shaking legs and knocked on the study door. "Come in," Victor called. Joseph entered to find Victor sitting behind his massive desk, looking relaxed and pleased. "Joseph, sit down," he said warmly. "I wanted to talk to you about your progress. You have been with us for 3 months now, and the reports I am getting are excellent. Marek says you have taken to the work naturally, that you are reliable and observant and fit in well with the team." Joseph sat down, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Thank you, sir," he managed. "I am glad my work is satisfactory." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying Joseph with those intense dark eyes. "More than satisfactory," he said. "You are exactly what I hoped you would be when I hired you. A man of integrity and dedication. That is why I want to offer you a promotion." Joseph's heart skipped a beat. "A promotion?" he repeated. "Yes," Victor said. "I want to bring you into my inner circle, make you head of personal security for my family. It would mean a significant pay increase, more responsibility, and greater access to all aspects of my business operations. You would be one of my most trusted employees." The offer hung in the air like a trap. Victor was giving him exactly what would make it harder to walk away, binding him more tightly to the organization, giving him more money and more reasons to stay quiet. Joseph looked at Victor's face, at the smile that did not quite reach his eyes, and understood that this was a test. Victor knew something, suspected something, and was seeing how Joseph would react. "I am honored by your confidence in me," Joseph said carefully. "Can I have some time to think about it? This is a big decision." "Of course," Victor said smoothly. "Take all the time you need. But Joseph, I hope you understand how much I value you, how much I have come to rely on you. Men like us men of principle. We need to stick together in this world." Joseph left the study, feeling like he was drowning. The walls were closing in. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it soon. That night, he called Maria and asked her to meet him for dinner. They sat in a small restaurant, and Joseph told her everything. He watched her face change as he spoke, saw the shock and fear and disappointment wash over her. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. "Papa, what are you going to do?" she finally asked, her voice small and scared. Joseph reached across the table and took her hand. "I do not know yet," he admitted. "But I need you to know that whatever I decide, I am doing it, because I love you and I want to be a man you can be proud of, even if that means walking away from everything." Joseph spent the next 3 days in careful, agonizing deliberation. He knew that whatever decision he made would define not just his future, but his very character, the essence of who he was as a man. He thought constantly about Anna, imagining what she would say if she were here. He could almost hear her voice, gentle but firm, reminding him that money and security meant nothing if they cost him his soul. She had lived and died with her integrity intact, and she would expect the same from him. On the 4th day, Joseph made his decision. He would gather evidence of Victor's crimes and take it to the authorities, regardless of the personal cost. But he would do it carefully, methodically, in a way that protected Maria and gave him the best chance of actually bringing Victor to justice. He could not live with himself knowing what he knew and doing nothing. Anna had not raised him that way. He had not raised Maria that way. If he stayed silent, if he let fear dictate his actions, he would be betraying everything he had ever stood for. The first step was documentation. Joseph began carrying a small notebook during his shifts, writing down everything he observed. The names of suspicious visitors, the times of late-night deliveries, the patterns of activity that suggested illegal dealings. He was careful to make his notes look innocent, like routine security logs, in case anyone saw them. He also began taking photographs with his phone whenever he could do so without being observed. Pictures of license plates, of men arriving and leaving, of anything that might serve as evidence later. The second step was finding an ally in law enforcement, someone he could trust who would not be connected to Victor's network of corrupt officials. Joseph remembered reading about a special investigator named Detective Svoboda who had recently been transferred to the city from the capital. The articles had described him as incorruptible, a man who had made enemies by refusing to look the other way on cases involving powerful people. Joseph researched him carefully, reading everything he could find, trying to determine if this was someone he could trust with information that could get them both killed. After a week of observation and note-taking, Joseph had accumulated a substantial amount of circumstantial evidence. But he knew it was not enough. He needed something concrete, something that would prove beyond doubt that Victor was involved in criminal activities. That meant going back to the basement office, back to the files he had seen, and this time taking photographs or copies of the most damning documents. The thought terrified him, but he saw no other option. Joseph planned his move carefully. He studied the patrol schedules, the patterns of activity in the house, the times when the basement level was least likely to be occupied. He chose a night when Victor was away on business, when the house would be quieter and security would be more relaxed. He volunteered for the midnight to 8 shift, knowing that the early morning hours would give him the best opportunity. He told no one of his plans, not even Maria. The less she knew, the safer she would be if everything went wrong. The night arrived with agonizing slowness. Joseph went through his shift as normally as possible, making his rounds, checking the monitors, chatting briefly with Pavel, who was on duty with him. At 3 in the morning, Joseph told Pavel he was going to do an extra patrol of the interior, checking some doors that had been sticking. Pavel nodded absently, focused on the security feeds, and Joseph slipped away. His heart pounded as he descended to the basement level. The door was locked this time, but Joseph had carefully observed Marek entering the code weeks ago, memorizing the sequence of numbers. His hands shook as he punched in the code, praying it had not been changed. The lock clicked open. Joseph exhaled in relief and stepped through, closing the door quietly behind him. He moved quickly through the basement corridors, his phone already out and ready. The office door was locked as well, but Joseph had anticipated this. During his weeks of observation, he had noticed that Victor sometimes left a spare key in a magnetic box attached to the underside of a nearby shelf. Joseph felt for it in the darkness, his fingers finally closing around the small metal container. Inside was the key. He unlocked the office and stepped inside. The room looked exactly as it had before, walls covered with incriminating evidence, desk piled with documents that detailed crimes ranging from blackmail to bribery to what looked like orchestrated violence against business rivals. Joseph began photographing everything, working systematically, making sure each image was clear and readable. He photographed the maps, the surveillance files, the financial records. He opened filing cabinets and photographed the contents, drawer by drawer. His phone's memory filled quickly, and he had to delete some older photos to make room for more. Time seemed to move strangely, too fast and too slow at once. Joseph was acutely aware of every sound, every creak of the house settling, every distant footstep that might signal discovery. Sweat dripped down his back despite the coolness of the basement. His hands trembled as he moved from file to file, knowing that each photograph could be the evidence that brought down Victor's empire, or the evidence that got Joseph killed. He found a folder labeled with the current year and opened it. Inside were recent operations, plans that had not yet been executed. Joseph's blood ran cold as he read about a scheme to intimidate a judge presiding over a case that could expose one of Victor's shell companies. There were photographs of the judge's family, his children, his elderly mother. There were detailed schedules of their movements, maps of their homes. The implication was clear and horrifying. Victor was preparing to threaten a judge's family to influence a court decision. Joseph photographed every page, his hands shaking harder now. This was it. This was the evidence that could not be explained away or dismissed. This showed clear intent to commit serious crimes, crimes that were about to happen, crimes that Joseph could potentially prevent if he acted quickly enough. He closed the folder and returned it to its exact position, making sure everything looked undisturbed. As he turned to leave, Joseph heard voices. They were distant but getting closer, coming from the stairwell. Panic surged through him. He looked around desperately for a place to hide. The office had no closets, no good cover. He moved quickly behind the door, pressing himself flat against the wall, hoping that if someone entered, they would not look behind them. The voices grew louder. Joseph recognized Victor's voice, which should have been impossible because Victor was supposed to be in another city on business. He had returned early. The basement door opened and footsteps echoed in the corridor. Joseph held his breath, his heart hammering so hard he thought it would give him away. The footsteps passed the office and continued down the hall. Victor was talking to someone, discussing a meeting scheduled for later that morning. Joseph remained frozen, not daring to move. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the voices faded, and the basement door closed. Joseph waited another 5 minutes, counting each second, before allowing himself to breathe normally. He slipped out of the office, locked it carefully, and returned the key to its hiding place. Then he made his way back upstairs, moving as quietly as a ghost. When he emerged on the ground floor, he nearly ran into Marek, who was coming around a corner. "Joseph." "There you are," Marek said. "I was about to radio you. Everything okay?" Joseph forced his voice to remain steady. "Yes, all good. Just finished the interior check. Everything is secure." Marek nodded and moved on, and Joseph returned to the security office, where Pavel was still monitoring the feeds. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion. When 8 in the morning finally arrived, and Joseph was relieved by the day shift, he felt like he had aged 10 years. He went to his room in the staff quarters and immediately transferred all the photographs from his phone to a secure cloud storage account he had set up for this purpose. Then he deleted them from his phone, clearing the cache and making sure there was no trace of what he had done. Only then did he allow himself to collapse on the bed, his body shaking with the after effects of fear and stress. Joseph knew he could not delay any longer. He had the evidence. Now he needed to get it to someone who could use it, someone who would act on it before Victor discovered what he had done. He composed a careful email to Detective Svoboda, explaining who he was, what he had witnessed, and what he had documented. He attached a selection of the most damning photographs and wrote that he had much more evidence available. He asked for a secure meeting, someplace public where they could not be observed. Then he held his breath and pressed send. The response came 3 hours later. Detective Svoboda agreed to meet him the following day at a busy cafe in the city center at noon. Joseph felt a wave of relief mixed with terror. This was really happening. He was going to expose Victor Kearney, one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the city. He was going to put himself and possibly Maria in grave danger. But he was also going to do the right thing, the thing Anna would have been proud of, the thing that would let him look at himself in the mirror without shame. That evening, Joseph called Maria and asked her to stay with a friend for the next few days. He did not explain why, just insisted it was important. Maria heard the urgency in his voice and agreed without argument. Joseph also withdrew a substantial amount of cash from his bank account, enough to live on for several weeks if he had to disappear. He packed a bag with essentials and hid it in his car. He was preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. The night before the meeting, Joseph barely slept. He lay in his narrow bed in the staff quarters, listening to the sounds of the house, wondering if this would be his last night here. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple janitor who had caught a falling girl and been rewarded with a job that seemed like a dream come true. But the dream had revealed itself to be something darker, and now Joseph was faced with the consequences of his own moral clarity. He could have looked the other way. He could have accepted the money and the comfort and told himself it was not his business. But that was not who he was. Anna had taught him better. Life had taught him better. As dawn broke, Joseph rose and dressed in civilian clothes rather than his security uniform. Today was one of his scheduled days off, which would make his absence less suspicious. He ate a small breakfast, though he had no appetite. He checked his phone obsessively, half expecting a message from Detective Svoboda cancelling the meeting, or worse, a message from Victor saying he knew everything. But no messages came. At 11 in the morning, Joseph left the estate in his old car and drove toward the city center, toward the meeting that would determine the course of the rest of his life. The cafe was crowded, exactly as Joseph had hoped. He arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the back with a clear view of the entrance. He ordered coffee he had no intention of drinking and watched the door, his nerves stretched tight as wire. Every person who entered made his heart jump. He kept his phone on the table, ready to call for help if needed, though he had no idea who he would call or what they could do. At precisely noon, a man in his early 40s entered the cafe. He was of average height, with short brown hair going grey at the sides, wearing a simple jacket and jeans. He looked around the room with sharp, assessing eyes, the eyes of someone trained to notice details. When his gaze landed on Joseph, there was a moment of recognition. He walked over to the table and extended his hand. "Mr. Novotny," he said quietly. "I am Detective Svoboda. Thank you for contacting me." Joseph shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested this was a man who worked with his hands, not just behind a desk. "Please, sit down," Joseph said. The detective sat across from him and ordered tea when the server came by. They waited in tense silence until the server left. Then Svoboda leaned forward. "I reviewed the photographs you sent," he said in a low voice. "If they are authentic, they represent evidence of serious criminal activity. Blackmail, bribery, conspiracy to intimidate witnesses and officials. This is major, Mr. Novotny. Do you understand the implications of what you are bringing to me?" Joseph nodded. "I understand," he said. "I also understand that Victor Czerny is a powerful man with connections throughout the city. I understand that going after him will be dangerous for both of us. That is why I needed to be sure you were someone I could trust." Svoboda's expression remained serious. "I have been investigating Czerny for 6 months," he said. "Ever since I was transferred here from the capital, there have been rumors, whispers, patterns that suggested criminal enterprise. But we have never had concrete evidence. Your photographs change everything. But I need to know more. How did you get access to these files? What is your connection to Czerny?" Joseph told him the whole story. The rescue of Eliska, the job offer, the discovery in the basement, the weeks of careful observation and documentation. Svoboda listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. When Joseph finished, the detective sat back and studied him for a long moment. "You took an enormous risk," he said finally. "If Czerny discovers what you have done, your life will be in danger." "Why did you do it? Why not just walk away, find another job, forget what you saw?" "Because I could not live with myself if I did," Joseph replied simply. "I have spent my whole life trying to be a good man, trying to live with integrity. If I stayed silent about this, if I let fear keep me from doing what is right, then everything I have tried to be would be a lie. I would be betraying my wife's memory, my daughter's trust, and my own values. The money and security are not worth that price." Svoboda nodded slowly, and for the first time, Joseph saw respect in his eyes. "All right," he said. "Here is what happens next. I need you to provide me with all the evidence you have collected, every photograph, every note, everything. I will take it to my superior and to the prosecutor's office. We will build a case against Czerny that is airtight. But you need to understand something, Mr. Novotny. Once we move on this, once we start making arrests and executing search warrants, Czerny will know he has been betrayed. He will know it came from inside his organization. You will need protection." Joseph felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of protection?" he asked. Svoboda leaned forward again. We can put you in protective custody, move you to a safe location until the trial. We can do the same for your daughter if necessary. But you will have to disappear for a while. Leave your job, your apartment, your normal life. You will essentially go into hiding until Cerny and his associates are behind bars. Are you prepared for that? The weight of the decision pressed down on Joseph. He thought about Maria, about her graduation in 2 weeks, about the life they had just started to build. He thought about his new apartment, his savings account, the security he had finally achieved. All of it would vanish the moment he handed over the evidence. But he also thought about the judge, whose family was being threatened, about all the people Victor had hurt and would continue to hurt if someone did not stop him. There was no real choice. I am prepared, Joseph said firmly. Tell me what you need me to do. Svoboda pulled out a small device that looked like a flash drive. I need you to transfer all your files to this, he said. It is encrypted and secure. Once you do that, I want you to go home, pack essentials for you and your daughter, and wait for my call. We will move quickly once we have the evidence. Within 24 hours, we should have warrants and arrest teams ready. Can you stay safe for that long? Joseph thought about his schedule. He was off for the next 2 days, which meant he would not be expected at the estate. Yes, I can stay away until then. I will tell them I am sick, that I need a few days to recover. Svoboda nodded. Good. And Mr. Novotny, one more thing. Do not contact anyone associated with Cerny. Do not go back to the estate for any reason. If they suspect anything, if they come looking for you, call me immediately. He handed Joseph a card with a phone number. This is my direct line. It is monitored 24 hours. Do not hesitate to use it. They completed the transfer of files in the cafe, Joseph connecting his phone to Svoboda's encrypted drive and copying over every photograph, every note, every piece of evidence he had collected. It took nearly 20 minutes, and Joseph's hands shook the entire time. When it was done, Svoboda pocketed the drive and stood up. You are doing the right thing, he said quietly. I know it does not feel like it right now. I know it feels terrifying and overwhelming. But you are saving lives, Mr. Novotny. You are stopping a man who has hurt countless people and would hurt countless more. That takes courage most people do not have. After Svoboda left, Joseph sat alone in the cafe for another 10 minutes, trying to calm his racing heart. He had just set in motion events that could not be stopped or reversed. There was no going back now. He paid for his coffee and walked out into the bright afternoon, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Every person on the street seemed suspicious. Every car that passed could be carrying Victor's men. Joseph forced himself to walk normally, to not look over his shoulder, to breathe steadily. He drove to Maria's university and waited outside her building. When she emerged from class, he called her over to the car. Her face showed immediate concern when she saw his expression. Papa, what is wrong? She asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. Joseph pulled away from the curb before answering. I met with the detective, he said. I gave him all the evidence. Things are going to move very quickly now, and we need to be prepared. Maria's eyes widened. What does that mean? What do we have to do? Joseph explained about the protective custody, about needing to leave their homes and go into hiding until Victor was arrested and the trial was over. Maria listened in stunned silence. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. My graduation, she said finally, her voice small. It is in 2 weeks. Joseph felt his heart break a little. "I know, sunshine. I am so sorry. We will miss it. But you will still get your diploma, still become a teacher. We just have to stay safe first." Maria nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. If this is what we have to do, then we do it. I trust you, Papa." They drove to Joseph's apartment first, where he packed 2 bags with clothes and essentials. He took the photograph of Anna from his nightstand, carefully wrapping it in a shirt. He took his important documents, his passport, Maria's birth certificate. He emptied his small safe of the cash he had withdrawn. Then they drove to Maria's student apartment and repeated the process. By evening, they were checked into a modest hotel on the outskirts of the city, registered under false names and paying in cash. That night, Joseph and Maria sat together in the hotel room, eating takeout food that neither of them really tasted. They talked about everything and nothing, avoiding the elephant in the room. Maria told him about her classes, about her friends, about her plans for teaching. Joseph listened and smiled and tried to memorize every detail of her face, every inflection in her voice. If something went wrong, if Victor found them before the police could act, he wanted these moments to be what he remembered. The call came at 6 in the morning. Joseph had barely slept, dozing fitfully in the hotel room chair while Maria slept in the bed. His phone buzzed, and he grabbed it immediately, seeing Svoboda's number on the screen. "Yes," he answered quietly, stepping into the bathroom so he would not wake Maria. "It is happening now," Svoboda said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "We have arrest warrants for Victor Cerny and 12 of his associates. Teams are moving on multiple locations simultaneously. We are hitting the estate, his office buildings, the homes of his key lieutenants. This is it, Mr. Novotny. We are taking him down." Joseph felt a surge of relief so powerful it made him dizzy. "When will you know if it worked?" he asked. "Within the hour," Svoboda replied. "I will call you as soon as Kearney is in custody. Stay where you are. Stay safe and wait for my call." Joseph hung up and stood in the small bathroom, his reflection staring back at him from the mirror. He looked older than he had 4 months ago, lines of stress etched around his eyes and mouth. But there was also something else in his expression, a clarity, a sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, he had done the right thing. He had stood up to power and corruption, had risked everything to protect innocent people. Anna would have been proud. He returned to the main room and sat in the chair, watching the morning light slowly fill the space. Maria stirred and woke, immediately looking to him for news. "It is happening," Joseph told her. "Right now. The police are arresting Victor and his people. We should know soon if it worked." Maria sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "I am scared, Papa," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if they come after us?" Joseph moved to sit beside her on the bed. "If they come, we run," he said simply. "We call the police. We get to safety. But I do not think they will have the chance. Victor is about to have much bigger problems than us." The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Joseph turned on the television and found a news channel, hoping for some coverage of the arrests. At first there was nothing, just normal morning news about weather and traffic. Then at 7:15, a breaking news banner appeared across the screen. "Major police operation underway," the text read. "Multiple arrests in connection with organized crime investigation." Joseph turned up the volume as the news anchor began speaking. "We are getting reports of a coordinated police action across the city this morning," she said. "Sources tell us that prominent businessman Victor Kearney is among those being detained as part of a wide-ranging investigation into corruption, blackmail, and racketeering." The screen switched to helicopter footage of the estate. Joseph recognized the gates, the long driveway, the magnificent house that had seemed like a palace when he first saw it. Now it was surrounded by police vehicles, their lights flashing. Officers in tactical gear were visible moving around the property. The reporter's voice continued over the footage. "Cerny, who is known for his real estate investments and political connections, has long been the subject of rumors regarding illegal activities, but this is the first time authorities have moved against him directly. We are told the evidence in this case is substantial and comes from a confidential source within Cerny's organization." Joseph's phone rang. He answered it immediately. Svoboda's voice was jubilant. "We have him," he said. "Cerny is in custody. So are 11 of his top associates. We executed search warrants on 6 properties and have already recovered extensive documentation corroborating your evidence. This is going to be the biggest corruption case this city has seen in decades, Mr. Novotny, and it is because of you." Joseph felt tears sting his eyes. "Is it over then?" he asked. "Can we go home?" "Not quite yet," Svoboda said. "We still need to process everything, and we will need your testimony eventually. But the immediate danger is past. Cerny and his people are locked up, and they are not getting out. You and your daughter are safe." After hanging up, Joseph turned to Maria and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "It is over," he whispered. "He is arrested. We are safe." Maria clung to him and cried, all the tension and fear of the past weeks pouring out in great shaking sobs. Joseph held her and let his own tears fall. Tears of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude that they had survived this. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, holding each other in a cheap hotel room while the world outside changed forever. Over the next few days, the full scope of Victor's criminal enterprise became public. The news was filled with stories of his victims, people who had been blackmailed or threatened or financially ruined by his schemes. The judge whose family had been targeted came forward to thank the anonymous source who had prevented an attack on his children. Other victims stepped forward as well, emboldened by Victor's arrest, sharing their stories of intimidation and coercion. The public outrage was immense. Victor Kearney, once respected and feared, was now revealed as nothing more than a sophisticated criminal who had used wealth and connections to prey on the vulnerable. Svoboda called Joseph regularly with updates. "The evidence you provided is holding up perfectly in court," he said during one call. "Cerny's lawyers are trying every trick they know, but they cannot get around those photographs and documents. The prosecutor is confident we will get convictions on multiple counts. You did it, Mr. Novotny. You brought down an empire built on suffering and corruption." Joseph felt a deep sense of satisfaction, but also sadness. He thought about Eliska, the innocent girl who had no idea what kind of man her father really was. He thought about Victor's wife, who would now face public shame and the collapse of everything she had known. They were victims, too, in their own way. 2 weeks after the arrests, Joseph and Maria were finally able to return to their normal lives. They moved back into their apartments, though Joseph knew he would need to find a new job soon. The security position was obviously gone, and he had no desire to return to that world, even if it had been offered. He thought about going back to janitorial work, to the simple, honest labor he understood. There was no shame in it, no compromise of values. It was good work, necessary work, and he had always taken pride in doing it well. But before he could start looking for employment, Joseph received an unexpected visitor. Detective Svoboda appeared at his door one evening with a serious expression. "Mr. Novotny, I wanted to speak with you in person," he said. "May I come in?" Joseph invited him in and offered coffee, which Svoboda accepted. They sat at Joseph's small kitchen table, and the detective pulled out an official-looking document. "The prosecutor's office and the police department want to recognize your contribution to this case," he said. "What you did took extraordinary courage and integrity. You put yourself at tremendous risk to protect others and uphold justice. That deserves to be acknowledged." He slid the document across the table. It was a commendation from the city, thanking Joseph for his service and bravery. There was also a check, a reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of individuals involved in organized crime. Joseph looked at the amount and felt his breath catch. It was more money than he had made in an entire year as a janitor. "I cannot accept this," he said, pushing the check back toward Svoboda. "I did not do it for money. I did it because it was right." Svoboda pushed the check back. "I know why you did it," he said gently. "But that does not mean you should not be compensated for the risks you took and the losses you incurred. You gave up a well-paying job. You put your daughter through trauma. You faced real danger. This money is not payment for doing the right thing. It is recognition of the sacrifice you made. Please, take it. Use it to build the life you and Maria deserve." Joseph looked down at the check, then at the commendation, then at Svoboda's kind face. Slowly, he nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means more than you know." After Svoboda left, Joseph sat alone in his kitchen, holding the check and thinking about everything that had happened. 4 months ago, he had been a simple janitor who caught a falling girl. That single act of instinct and courage had led him on a journey through wealth and corruption, through moral testing and ultimate redemption. He had lost the security he had briefly gained, but he had kept something far more valuable: his integrity, his self-respect, his ability to look at himself in the mirror and know he was a good man. 6 months passed, and life found a new rhythm for Joseph and Maria. The reward money had given them breathing room, allowing Joseph to take his time finding the right job rather than grabbing the first opportunity out of desperation. He eventually accepted a position as a maintenance supervisor at a community center, work that combined his practical skills with his natural kindness toward people. The pay was modest but fair, and he took pride in keeping the center clean and welcoming for the children and families who used it every day. It felt right, felt like coming home to himself after a strange detour through a world that had never really been meant for him. Maria had graduated on schedule, her diploma arriving in the mail since she had missed the ceremony. Joseph had framed it and hung it on the wall of his apartment, right next to the photograph of Anna. He looked at both every day, drawing strength from the past and hope from the future. Maria had found a teaching position at an elementary school across the city, and Joseph had never seen her happier. She called him almost every evening to tell him about her students, about the lessons she was developing, about the small victories and challenges of shaping young minds. Listening to her voice, hearing the joy and purpose in it, Joseph knew that every sacrifice he had ever made had been worth it. The trial of Viktor Kearney had concluded just 2 weeks ago. Joseph had testified, standing in the witness box and calmly recounting what he had seen and heard, presenting the evidence he had gathered at such great personal risk. Victor had sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his face a mask of cold fury, his dark eyes boring into Joseph throughout the testimony. But Joseph had not looked away, had not faltered. He had spoken the truth clearly and completely, and the jury had listened. The verdict came back guilty on 17 counts, including blackmail, bribery, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit assault. Victor Kearney was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He would be an old man before he ever tasted freedom again, if he lived that long. Joseph had felt no triumph at the sentencing, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served and that Victor could hurt no one else. He thought sometimes about Eliska, wondering how she was coping with the revelation that her father was a criminal. He had seen her mother interviewed on the news, pale and shaken, insisting she had known nothing of her husband's activities. Joseph believed her. She had seemed genuinely shocked and devastated. He hoped Eliska would be all right, that she would grow up to be nothing like her father, that the kindness he had shown in saving her life would be a memory she could hold on to when everything else seemed dark. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Joseph was walking through the park near his apartment when he saw a familiar figure on a bench. It was Thomas, the student from his old school who had always greeted him with such respect. The boy was taller now, almost a young man, reading a book with focused concentration. Joseph approached with a smile. "Thomas!" he called out. The young man looked up and his face broke into a delighted grin. "Mr. Joseph!" he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "I heard about what you did, about stopping that criminal. Everyone at school was talking about it. You are a real hero." Joseph shook his head gently. "I am no hero, Thomas. I just did what needed to be done. But tell me about you. How is school? How is life treating you?" They sat together on the bench and talked for nearly an hour. Thomas shared that he was doing well in his studies, planning to apply to university, hoping to become an engineer. Joseph listened with genuine interest, offering encouragement and advice, feeling that old familiar warmth of connection with a good young person, trying to make his way in the world. When they finally parted ways, Joseph felt lighter somehow, reminded that there was goodness and hope in the world, despite all the darkness he had witnessed. That evening, Joseph prepared dinner in his small kitchen, simple food made with care. He set the table for two because Maria was coming over, something she did at least once a week. When she arrived, she brought flowers, bright yellow chrysanthemums that reminded Joseph of Anna. They ate together and talked about their days, about Maria's students and Joseph's work at the community center. It was ordinary and beautiful, this quiet life they had built together, father and daughter supporting each other through all of life's challenges. After dinner, they sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Maria rested her head on Joseph's shoulder. "I am proud of you, Papa," she said softly. "I know these past months have been hard. I know you gave up a lot. But you showed me what it really means to have integrity, to stand up for what is right, even when it costs you everything. That is the greatest lesson you could ever teach me." Joseph felt tears prick his eyes. "Your mother taught me that," he said. "She lived it every day of her life. I am just trying to honor her memory by being the man she believed I was." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Joseph thought about the strange journey his life had taken. He had started as a poor boy in a factory town, become a loving husband and father, lost his beloved wife, struggled alone to raise his daughter, worked for 18 years in quiet obscurity, saved a falling girl, been offered wealth and security, discovered corruption at the heart of that wealth, and ultimately chosen principle over comfort. It had been a hard road, full of difficult choices and painful sacrifices. But he had walked it with his head held high and his conscience clear. Joseph thought about Anna, about what she would say if she could see him now. He imagined her smile, warm and proud, her eyes full of love. "You did good, Joseph," she would tell him. "You stayed true to yourself and to me. You raised our daughter to be strong and kind and brave. You made the world a little bit better by being in it. That is all anyone can hope to do." Joseph whispered to her memory, "I hope I made you proud. I tried my best to be the man you deserved." And in the quiet of his heart, he felt her answer, a gentle presence that said she had always been proud, that she was with him still, that love never really ended. It just changed form. The city stretched out before them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each one a story of struggle and hope, of choices made and consequences faced. Joseph was just one man among millions, no longer invisible perhaps, but still fundamentally ordinary. He was not rich or powerful or famous. He was simply a man who had done the right thing when it mattered most, who had chosen integrity over ease, who had valued principle above personal gain. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The photograph of Anna on his wall seemed to glow softly in the lamplight, her smile eternal and loving, a reminder that the best things in life, love and honor and moral courage, could never be bought or sold, only lived and cherished and passed on to those who came after. Joseph closed his eyes and felt at peace, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, he would face them as he had always faced them, with honesty, with kindness, and with the quiet strength of a man who knew his own worth had nothing to do with money or status, but everything to do with the choices he made and the values he upheld. This was his life, simple and good and true, and he would not trade it for all the wealth in the world.